Welcome to the breakout session for BPM-CON, and in this session I'm really happy to be introducing Bob Ragsdale, Vice President of Marketing at MicroPact, which is the developer of IntelliTrack, a unified platform for case management and BPM. Bob, welcome back to BPM-CON.
Thank you, Vance.
In Bob's post, he helps drive MicroPact's BPM case management solutions to ensure that they meet customer needs, especially in this new era of the need for more business-driven and agile applications. He brings 20 years experience or more in working with organizations to translate operations into actionable and easy to understand solutions and best practices. And prior to working at MicroPact, Bob did a stint with a pretty innovative mobile platform developer, Privatio. In his session, How Case Management Turns BPM on its Head, Bob will explore the dynamic changing landscape of BPM and case management, where agility and business impact are both the driving needs. He also shares MicroPact's approach to delivering a quick and lasting value through its casework technology and methodology, which can leverage dynamic, unstructured, and even ad hoc processes, environments where some of you know traditional BPM can fall short. Just a quick reminder, if you haven't downloaded Bob's slides already, you can do so right now. They're available right here in the breakout room under the viewing area. Also, we have other related links there. Bob and his team assembled a great list of analyst reports and other technology overviews that you can download right now. And where we can, we like to make this interactive. So to ask Bob a question or make a comment, simply type into the Submit a Question box. And now, Bob, let me hand it to you, and you can tell us about how case management turns BPM on its head.
Thank you very much, Vance. Thank you for listening today. Yeah, as Vance said, how case management turns BPM on its head. The agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about case management and BPM and our view of that world, and then talk about when we're doing case management modeling, how you can involve users and through that process, accelerate outcomes, accelerate the system build, and ultimately create really good systems of engagement that your people will actually want to use. A lot of analysts have been talking lately about the death knell of BPM, and I do like this one from my friend Clay Richardson at Forrester. In the next 3 to 5 years, expect to see traditional BPM methods and practices decrease in adoption. For effective business process design, focus on the user experience first. And you never can overestimate how important engaging users is in building a system. So today we're going to talk a little bit how in a case management scenario, you elevate information over policies and procedures, how that in turn then accelerates application development, how you can engage users to be part of the development process from the outset, and ultimately how we increase system adoption. And I think a good place to start really is talking about what is case management and how does it live relative to the BPM world. A basic definition is really that manila folder, that folder where you're going to stick all your information. It's that folder that you walk from office to office, gathering information, moving it to the next person in the process. They maybe add something, take something out, make a decision, and move it on. But the case itself is the focal point for the work you will be doing. And it's the normal things we do in everyday life. It's contract management, claim management, background investigations. All these are great examples of case-type scenarios. And with that, then, we have to talk about sort of the characteristics. And so, one, it's highly structured. It's structured around the information, but at the same time, it's very collaborative. So it has to be a very dynamic application that's open to change, but being information intensive at the same time. As we're gathering information, we might find something that we didn't anticipate, and so that could be an event which is going to change our process in real time. So we have to be able to accommodate incremental and progressive responses from the business in real time. And so our system has to be able to manage to that. So we have to have sort of flexi points in our system. And we have to evolve at the pace that business is evolving. We can't have a system lagging behind. We need to be able to change the system in real time. So when I look at all of those characteristics, that is not a description of BPM as usual. And it's very important to start from, I think, a BPM perspective because so many people look at case management from that perspective. But BPM's core value really is seeing process as a strategic asset. Whether it's at the application level or the organizational level, the real value of BPM is the continual maturing of processes to the benefit of the business, which is a very good goal. The issue that I see sometimes, though, is when people look at case management, they look at it through a BPM lens. And they cast case management as an unstructured process. And while it's true, there are a lot of unstructured processes in case scenarios, that is not the value of case management. That is not what you were looking for in a case management scenario. The case itself is what creates value, right? It's the case itself that Zach here and Padna from our organization are going to have to guide through some certain amount of steps and collaborate on. But ultimately, what we want from a case is the delivery of an appropriate outcome. Because if we're processing a Medicaid claim for somebody, it doesn't necessarily matter how efficiently we get to the ruling on that claim. What matters is that we make the proper decision that will affect that individual's life. And so we want to make sure that we have the right information in front of the right people at the right time so that they can then guide that case to an appropriate outcome. So if we're doing that, then we're trying to make these decisions, we're going to first elevate information over the policies and procedures, right? So there's going to be an emphasis on the data. So the case is a piece of information. It's very information intensive. It's the case that we're tracking, so we're tracking the data. And as we're assembling this data, we're assembling our system, we're going to establish these parent-child relationships. Within a case, we might have some documents, we might have the people that we're interviewing, we might have the ruling or verdict, and process is actually going to become secondary for us. For one thing, John Brozich, who's sitting here, one of our project managers, is not going to be able to necessarily project and understand the progression of every case at design time. And it's going to have to be dynamic. He's going to have to be able to change cases, their patterns, as he's working with them. And so this relies very heavily on his experience as a knowledge worker. And if we look at case management and business process management relative to the data and the processes, we see that up at the top right, BPM, really is built around structured processes and structured data. At its extreme, BPM can be a machine-to-machine interaction. It can be a credit card transaction. It's very structured with structured data in terms of the process and data. Case management at the opposite extreme, though, if I'm doing a background investigation, say, for somebody, I'm going to have depositions. I might have a video deposition in there. I'm going to be gathering documents and scans. And based on the information that's coming in, I might change the process because it might dictate my next step. And the other thing we have to realize, though, is that nothing generally lives at those extremes. Some things are fully BPM, some are fully case management, but a lot of life is in the gray area. So we're going to end up probably in the middle sometimes with our systems. If we are building something that is very rigid data, rigid process, we will start at the far right of that spectrum with BPM, which would be starting with process. But if we're starting something that's a little bit looser, well, we're going to probably want to start with the information as we will in a case management scenario. And most, as I said, are somewhere in the middle, might have a couple of rigid steps and then sort of an area that we're gathering a bunch of information and then some more rigid steps. Certainly in our environment, these are what we call pre-configurations. These are off-the-shelf, ready-to-go solutions. And we have at the top above these bars, the red dots, sort of that spectrum of case management to BPM spectrum. And most of what we build is on the left side of that spectrum. And we usually start with information gathering. And case management scenarios fall kind of into three big buckets. We have investigative type cases, service requests, and incident management cases. But most of these, particularly incident management, responding to an emergency, I can't project what the actual process is going to be. Events are going to dictate the process. So the other piece of this, though, is how do we involve users in the development process of what we're building, right? And this is what we call the data-first approach. And this is a stark difference between modeling for BPM and modeling for case management. Data first, the nice thing about it, data is tangible, even when it's unstructured. I can talk to any user and say, what are the forms you need to start with? What are the reports you want to see? And they can describe that to me. And in the process of describing that to me, they say, well, at the outset, this is a form that I start with. And then as we gather information, then it has to go over to Joe for a review and then Sally for another review. And so they start establishing what the states or milestones are. So we start to learn the process by going through the data. But at the outset, if we begin with process, it may be very difficult for us. And certainly most end users can't describe an end-to-end process anyway. You need to be well-versed in BPMN to do that. And I like to kind of bring it home to my shopping analogy. When I wake up and I think about my Saturday chores, I don't start with a process. I don't jump in my car and leave the driveway and go to Home Depot and then to the supermarket and the hardware store or what have you. I start with the data. I start with my list. Oh, I'm going to pick up some milk and peanut butter and cream, and then I need to get some cement and lumber and some things for my wife, some bed sheets and some pillows. I figure out my data structure first, and then I figure out the most efficient process to accomplish that task. Because really, this is very hard to conceptualize. This is hard for most people to deal with, and most people do not have the tools, so this is not a great way to engage with the business. But if you want to engage with a business user, talking about this, the forms that they're using, the spreadsheets that they capture information in, the reports they need to see. This is easy. This is normal communication stuff, and everybody can participate. So you get them involved very early in your process. And the other thing is we have to make sure that all that data that we're capturing is complete, because it has to be accurate if we're going to deliver that appropriate outcome. The other piece is we have to make sure that this, as we call it, a case vehicle, is big enough to hold all of our stuff, right? So we're going to start with the design of that vehicle. How many doors do I need on this vehicle? What are the on-ramps onto the system that I need? Do I have to be able to email information in? Do I need to pull it from another database? Do I have to be able to scan it in? So what are the on-ramps? How big does it have to be? How much information are we going to carry? And then what are the off-ramps? Does it have to have letter generation? Does it have to have direct email capability? And so understanding all of that. So if we start first with the vehicle, then we can map out the roads where we want to go. And in a case management scenario, what generally happens is we find that people start taking detours. And if they start taking a particular detour often enough, well, we can say, well, let's establish some rules around that detour, and let's make that part of the process as well, so we can grow it over time. I like to talk about 3 core business enablers. Whether I'm doing BPM or case management, or I'm not working with a system at all, to run my business, I need information, policies, and procedures. Right? I have information on my employees. There's policies that govern their behavior, and there's procedures which govern other parts of the business. If I'm modeling BPM, I'm going to start at the bottom of this stack and work my way up. I'll start by mapping out my processes. I might then attach some policies to those, and they can be standards-based, such as HIPAA, or they might be domain-based. It might be unique to a financial institution. And then lastly, I would do my information model. However, if I'm doing case management, I'm going to flip that stack on its head. I'm going to start with information. I'm going to elevate that over my policies and procedures, and then I'm going to attach policies. And case management theoretically can work with just those first 2 boxes. I don't need procedures. For example, here at work, we have a policy that employees should be in the building by 9:30 in the morning. Well, it might happen that someone on my team might show up not at 9:30, and I can set a trigger in the system to say, hey, if this employee doesn't arrive by 9:30, send me an email. But I, as a knowledge worker, can decide what the next step might be. Roger might not show up on time, but I might know that he had a sick child last night, so I'm not going to worry about it until about 11 this morning, at which point I can do something. Now, I can also make that into a rigid procedure. I can say, you know, any employee who's late more than 10 times will get a letter of counsel, right? So we can establish procedures, and we can change them on the fly. So if I kind of expand this to how we actually model in IntelliTrack, again, we start at the top. We start with data modeling. We model our case, whether there's going to be unstructured data and structured data. If there's unstructured data, we're going to need an area for supporting documents. You know, we'll have some sort of case info. Usually because we're dealing with human beings, we have to have an area for contacts and events. And then we put it all together in a dashboard. But then the rest of it sort of happens all together. We have our policy modeling and our workflow modeling. Now, in case management, particularly in the way that we do it, we actually don't use BPM-CON. We use a UML-based state model. Because, as I said before, people can identify the states. So a case might have several states that it goes through: pre-complaint, formal complaint, legal review, ruling, whatever. And we might have policies that govern those states. We might say that you can't go from pre-complaint to formal complaint unless you've had mediation. So I might have a policy for a state, or one that bridges a couple of states, or it might be a global policy. If this individual is a felon, they're not eligible for this security position. That global policy would then send them to a closed state. And the nice thing with a state model then is I can establish a very rigid BPM workflow with a one-to-one state relationship, or I can leave it very ad hoc. I can have one-to-many, many-to-one, many-to-many relationships between my states. And so this type of case management modeling makes it very flexible. I can also have a lot of relationships between the different events, and I can establish event-driven workflows. So modeling case management systems this way gives us a lot of flexibility. So what I want to move on to, though, is talk about, well, how do we really engage users and get them excited about this? First thing I want you to do is get rid of the tiger team, that group of individuals that does process modeling, that sits in a room by themselves, is disconnected from everybody else in the organization. I want you to say hello to the home team. Say hello to Magda and Oliver and Isabel, because these are the people doing the work on the front line, like these guys are here, and they know the information. And when you should start thinking about the system that you want to build, do it before you even selected a technology. because you're going to get people thinking about transformation very early on in the process. They can talk about the data that they want to bring to the table. They have more time to ideate. It will drive interest, excitement, collaboration, and ultimately enhanced buy-in as you start building your system. Plus, if you've done all this upfront work, you can ask your vendor to do a prototype for you, which I would encourage you to do so you can see that system and see what it's going to feel like. You should involve people at every level throughout your organization. Everybody's going to have different needs. Everyone's going to want to see a different part of the case as it moves through the process. And all the information they're going to want are really data points. People aren't going to inundate you with the process. They're going to inundate you with the information they need. Right? And the best practice, as I said, establish that data set and then build that prototype so you can see what that thing looks like when it comes to life. And we call that design by doing. Because as users contribute, they can see how the system is going to look. As I look at this form, I can see that I forgot a field, so maybe I should add that. In a system that's dynamic, you can then add that field, and they can see it changing all the time. As they see it changing, they become very accepting of the fact that the system doesn't have to be rigid and one way for the rest of their life. And the other thing is, as you're going through this information gathering, the process modeling becomes organic. People can say, hey, from this pre-complaint state, we go to formal complaint or legal review. And from formal complaint, we can go to legal review, or we can go back to pre-complaint. So it becomes a very natural discovery process that you can involve at all levels of your organization. So everybody feels included, which is a good thing. They see the modeling happening. They see how a dynamic case management system or adaptive case management system, whatever you want to call it, can adapt on the fly. So they don't get hung up on that as-is state, which is so important. Because if they're not hung up on this as-is state, that means they're comfortable to move forward because they see that the system can change. So if you didn't get their needs today, you can do it tomorrow, and they believe it. So your development moves very quickly, and they're ready to deploy earlier because they know that you can change it in the future if you have to. So how I want to kind of sum up on this then is, case management really shouldn't be viewed through a BPM lens because it begins with data, not process. Case management is very understandable because it's the information that everybody works with every day. It allows you to engage your users up front. It's inclusive. The more people you include in the process, the more it helps drive adoption. And because it's very iterative, it's very rapid to build these systems and deploy these systems. So I encourage you to think about how you can do this on your own. Think about starting with a data-first orientation and how that might help you build systems of engagement. And I just want to conclude very quickly 4 slides talking about the technology that we use, that we've built. It's IntelliTrack. We describe it as a unified enterprise-level platform that takes a data-first approach to creating continuously configurable case management and BPM solutions. Most of what we build and historically have built tend to lean towards the case management side. We call it no-bloat. It's a powerful, open standards, open architecture, platform independence piece of software that makes it extensible, interoperable, and portable. It's available with mobile. Document management is built in. Analytics are built in, e-file, e-scan, but they're also optional. So if those aren't pieces that you need, you're not paying for those. We have been around for 17 years. Today, our products serve 97% of U.S. federal agencies with more than 500 employees. 96% of those renew every year, and 80% of our customers have 2 or more deployments. And as I said before, the best way to understand one of these systems and to work with one is to do a prototype. We will work with you to build a prototype for you based on your needs. So if you want to have a conversation, please give me a call. It's Bob Ragsdale, bragsdale@micropact.com, and I'd be happy to listen to you and understand how we might help you out. So that concludes my formal presentation, and I'll hand it back to Vance now for any questions.
Bob, thanks very much for a great overview of the new world of case management and BPM, not only infrastructure, but to get from design to deployment. Really great overview, and thanks for the extra info about your technology solution. As you might expect, here at BPM-CON, we've got a mix of both the IT architect professional as well as the line of business. So with your permission, let's start with questions.
That'll be great.
So, Bob, let's take a level set here just so that people could get a sense of how to wrap their brain around what you're talking about as far as a much more agile, solutions-driven case management approach to solving some of these bigger issues. And the question simply talks about, Can you explain the best way to think about the case management lifecycle as opposed to a BPM lifecycle?
Well, I think the main difference is who you have on the team that's heading up the project. For traditional BPM implementation, you really have to have people who are well-versed in BPMN. Certainly in case management, it helps to have that as well. It doesn't hurt. But the nice thing is that you can engage such a wider audience. Also, if you're working with a dynamic platform, you can be building the solution right in front of people's eyes. In our case, we start by saying, here's our main case objects, and here are the child objects. And as we build that, the entire interface of the application is being built before a person's eyes. That allows them to give input to say, gosh, I forgot to mention we need to capture this data. Oh, after this screen here, we really need to move on to this step. So it becomes a very organic process. Because most BPM solutions, when they fail, is not because it's a bad system. I mean, it's a great tool, but oftentimes people are so disconnected from the development process that when they're presented with a solution, they don't see it as meeting their needs. If you can involve them at every stage, either through development or just through review states, then they have a belief and they have buy-in. So when you deploy it, they're excited to use it. And I think that is really one of the things that makes case management and this approach a very successful approach. We had a great example of this recently that I just presented at a Forrester forum with one of our customers, Maximus, who built a workers' compensation system for the state of California using our platform. They began using a traditional process approach, and because people became so mired in the process, they were stalled. It wasn't a technology problem, it was a communication problem. Once they backed up and said, okay, well, let's just talk about the information we need to capture at each state, and let's see what the information we need to facilitate movement on these cases, everything began moving very quickly, and they were able to deploy a system very quickly. And so it's really taking those same tools that you have, but just applying them a little bit differently that gives you so much more flexibility and allows you to accelerate processes.
Excellent, excellent. Bob, you mentioned this data-centric approach a couple of times, and it caught fire with some constituents in our audience. And one of the questions is, taking a data-centric approach implies that we need to do perhaps some data discovery and some data integration. How does MicroPact help us with those two tasks?
That's a very good question, Vance. Taking the data-centric approach, or the data-first approach as we call it, really means that it happens at a lot of different levels. It happens at the form level, what is the information I need to capture as an individual? It happens at the system level, what are the other information repositories that we're going to have to plug into and either migrate across or pull information and feed information to in a real time. So one of the first things that we always do is understand that entire landscape. To be able to interact with all of that, you've really got to have a very open platform that can allow you to push and pull irrespective of the systems you're working with. Certainly in our case, it's paramount. Working across the federal government, one, we never know what type of system we're going to sit on, what sort of a database we have to interact with, the different controls that we have to move information across, whether it's integrating at the API layer, ESB layer, or whatever it may be. So taking stock of all of that is really forms your landscape. Once you've got that, then you can say like, okay, well, here's the things that we just don't want to move. Fine, then you build your system around that. You understand the pieces that you want to move and get out of that legacy system, and you build your system around that piece as well. So taking stock of where all the data lives is really one of the first pieces as well.
Another topic that you touched on more than once was this idea of agility, or at least quick, not just design, but actually getting people to find them usable and embrace them. So a couple of questions on that, Bob.
Sure.
One question here talks about your slide that mentioned all the examples that IntelliTrack had, and specifically the question says, can the speaker explain if these are just customer examples, or are these available pre-configured apps that anyone can use?
Great question. These are what we call pre-configurations, and so these are pre-configured apps that you might think of them as application accelerators as well. They are pretty much 80% built applications. Nobody does a background investigation exactly like anybody else does, or necessarily runs their workers' compensation system exactly like anybody else. An organization has its own taxonomy. It probably has some of its own policies, and then certainly the integration points that we just spoke of before are going to be different. So these pre-configurations give us that sort of 80% build, or the customer then completes them so that it meets the exact needs of their organization. They've all been really created out of apps that we see as very repeatable type processes, meaning that we've been asked to build a reasonable accommodation system or a labor relations system, over and over. So they do reflect best practices. Many of them reflect federally mandated policies that have to be in place in order to comply with certain laws and things like that. Then, of course, many of them also have the ability to suggest to the caseworker, in this scenario, here are some of your best options that you might want to consider, because the best practice is sort of baked into it. So that's what we look at the pre-configurations to do for organizations. Similarly, though, and you can always start with just a platform, and you can build something from scratch and create something that is entirely custom to your organization as well. And in the app as well, you have built-in help, and you can customize that help module to exactly the needs of every worker at every point in the process. That's what's nice about working with IntelliTrack, is because you can change the app in real time, you can model it before people's eyes, you can work with them, and you can understand those issues, and you can change it.
Very cool. Very cool. I know we're just about out of time, Bob, but we always ask all our speakers here if there are easy ways for customers or prospects to give the latest edition of their technologies a try. Do you have options that people could not just download white papers, but get a trial of IntelliTrack?
Yeah, the best way is just to go directly to our website, micropact.com or IntelliTrack.com. At the very top of the banner, on the home page, and on every interior page, there's a free prototype button. And just click on it and fill out the form, and that will send us a note about what you're looking to do. We'll reach back out to you and begin to work with you to capture your requirements, and we'll put a prototype together for you if it makes sense. It probably will not have all the underlying rules, but it will look like the app. You will understand what it's going to be like to interface with the app. You'll be able to capture the data. You'll be able to move through the different stages. And it normally takes us about a week. We have usually an hour-long, 2-hour-long information gathering call. Then we go away and we build a prototype for you, and then we work with you so you can see and you can interact with the app and understand how this is going to work if you wanted to build out a fully built app.
Wow, that sounds terrific. Really great session. Bob Ragsdale, Vice President over at MicroPact. Thanks very much for giving us a tour of this brand new world of case-driven apps for BPM that are very business-focused and easy to not only design but to deploy, and especially for taking so many questions. Really great session.
Thank you for the opportunity of being here.
And as we love to do here at BPM-CON, Bob mentioned quite a number of resources to his website, including that great free prototype offer, where you have a slide up here with links to many of those resources. And just a reminder, we've got some terrific downloadable material, including some analyst reports here in the MicroPact breakout room. So thanks again, everyone.